be able to do what we do, and how much we owe our career to the fact that they paved the way with bands that do improvisational music and sort of make their own career, make their living as a touring act, and more specifically the styles of improv that we picked up from them as well. So I mean, we're big fans.
Most bands' careers follow much the same pattern. They work up to the position where they can release a single, then continue to produce singles and albums until the breakthrough, when their popularity increases sharply. As they gain recognition, so does their live profile. They begin in small clubs and eventually work up to larger venues such as concert halls and theatres. If they're lucky, they end up playing stadiums and arenas. This is the accepted way of doing things, and it's also the way that most record companies try to steer their clients. However, occasionally a band appears that follows a very different path to success. Somehow they manage to achieve great degrees of popularity without the benefit of hit singles and MTV promotion. The first band to do this were the Grateful Dead, who found themselves attracting thousands upon thousands of people to their concerts, while their albums and singles went largely ignored by both the fans and the critics. Eventually, they began to forget about the albums and concentrated on their live performances, which soon became legendary. In recent times, another band has managed to repeat this unlikely route to success. Despite releasing their first album 15 years ago, Fish have failed to match their reputation in record sales to that of their concerts. From playing to tiny audiences in half-empty clubs, they have gone on to fill stadiums, all without the benefits of a hit single. Their story is unprecedented in the history of popular music, and it remains as a testament to their unique abilities. In the early 60s, the university town of Princeton was rapidly growing in size, and the expansion provided plenty of job opportunities. Like many people in the area, Trey's father found employment in an educational capacity. Working for the Educational Testing Service, he helped administer the SATs, or Standard Assessment Tests, that every American teenager has to take. Trey's mother landed a job that was much more attractive to her young son. Having been an editor for local newspapers in New York, in Princeton she gained the position of editor at the Sesame Street magazine, a publication based on the popular children's TV program. She often used Trey as a guinea pig, testing out ideas to see what a child's response would be. The young boy greatly enjoyed experimenting with the number and word games that his mother included in the magazine. From an early age, Trey was fascinated by wordplay, something that would later on evolve into his own creative efforts. Like his mother, he had a strong creative streak and loved to make up stories and fantasy tales. From the age of 4, Trey attended the Princeton Day School, where a wide variety of instruments. Even though he left school as a teenager, Trey kept in contact with his old friends, and they would be somewhere in the background throughout most of his career. After leaving Princeton Day School, Trey attended Taft High School in nearby Watertown, Connecticut. It was here that his musical abilities began to truly flourish. Although he remained primarily a drummer, his inquisitive musical nature led him to begin experimenting with the guitar. Preferring not to take lessons, Trey learned everything he could from listening to and mimicking his favourite records. By the time he was 16, he had become a serious fan of the eccentric New York band Talking Heads, and several of their songs would be later covered by Fish. With his guitar abilities progressing, Trey also began to appreciate the virtuosos of the day, particularly Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page. While most of Fish's material would have little in common with the powerful blues-based rock played by Page and his band, both shared a love of improvisation, frequently extending songs well past their original length. It wasn't long before Anastasio became involved in one of the many musical projects based at the Taft High School. He auditioned for the position of drummer with an 8-man rock band called Red Tide and easily got the job. Red Tide specialised in renditions of the classic rock hits of the day. The music didn't challenge Trey particularly, but it was good practice and he enjoyed the band atmosphere. 2 Two of his old friends from Princeton Day School, Mark Dover and Dave Abrahams, also joined Red Tide, which had expanded to become an 11-piece outfit. Unfortunately, the venture was doomed to failure. Several members of Red Tide were older than Trey and his friends and were due to graduate a year earlier. When they left, the band was reduced to just 4 people, with Trey as the only remaining guitarist. Switching from drums to guitar, he began to prepare new material with the aid of his friends. Another old friend, Steve Pollock, began to hang out with the band, and it wasn't long before he also revealed his songwriting abilities. After seeing some of his lyrics, Trey and the band decided that Steve's work should be used with the music that Trey was composing. The new lineup eventually took their name from one of Steve's songs, Space Antelopes. The Space Antelopes were also only a short-lived affair, but they had much in common with Fish. They moved away from the big radio hits that Red Tide had played, preferring to learn numbers by lesser-known bands, as well as preparing their own material. Frequently, but he soon became disillusioned with the university's program. Although it gave him the chance to investigate different musical forms and styles, the course was geared towards preparing the students to be music teachers rather than musicians. Trey had no desire to teach the subject and was frustrated by his tutor's somewhat emotionless attitude towards his greatest love. The philosophy course proved equally unsatisfying to Trey, as it required the kind of academic discipline that he simply did not possess. He managed to survive by doing the bare minimum, but he rarely viewed his work with anything approaching enthusiasm. However, like many students, Anastasio discovered that other aspects of university life more than compensated for the problems with his academic work. Before long, he was hosting his own Monday morning show at the college radio station.
Going on at about 9, I think, at night. In Woodstock, going on at 7 in the morning. And at Rainbow Bridge in Hawaii went on at noon. And the Isle of Hawaii went on at like 3 in the morning. Everybody always plays it at 7:30 at night.
It wasn't long before the foursome was ready to play their first public gig. Preferring not to play in a pub or club for the first show, they managed to get themselves booked for a Halloween dance in one of the college dormitories. Still without a name, the band decided to go under the heading of the Blackwood Convention until something better suggested itself. Practicing heavily, they assembled a set of rock and pop standards, featuring a number of songs by Creedence Clearwater Revival, the classic 70s country rock outfit. Despite their preparation, disaster. The band was entirely unsuited to that kind of occasion and found themselves on the receiving end of a certain amount of hostility from the audience. The dance was a formal affair, involving tuxedos for the men and expensive evening dresses for the women. The Blackwood Convention appeared in jeans and t-shirts, as well as loud Hawaiian shirts and trainers. Creedence Clearwater Revival had long since faded into relative obscurity, and the smartly dressed audience weren't impressed by these covers or the extended improvisation that made up much of the band's set, and they made their displeasure obvious. In the middle of the third song, the band suddenly discovered that their microphones and instruments had been faded out and replaced with Michael Jackson's Thriller. One of the unhappy listeners had run back to their room to fetch a tape, which was then played over the band. Humiliated and angry, the 4 musicians gathered their equipment and left through a back door.
I don't think that it's that hard to remain true to yourself, though. I don't, and even the things that you may have said, we've got a kind of a unique situation. Our fans are so fanatical that they hold us to it as much as we hold ourselves to it. You know? So, and they encourage us to continue on in the sort of course. They want us to be improvising in new and different ways, and they like the new songs. They want us to. They don't hear free every night.
In 1985, an opportunity arose for Fish to play the biggest gig of the so far. Mike brought new people at nearby Goddard College, in particular the people in charge of entertainment. Who is using an acoustic guitar and various kinds of percussion, the trio bussed in many cities across Europe, playing in 2 gigs wherever they could. Several Newton, which Anastasia would show to the rest of the band on his return. At one point, Trey phoned Mike in Burlington, encouraging him to come out and join the others on their European tour. Mike refused, but told Trey about what he and Paul had been doing, how perfect he would be. And thankfully, his natural talents and his familiarity with the material impressed the others, who realised that he might be a valuable addition to the band. McConnell was therefore invited to join Fish, and he happily agreed. After 6 months of dedication to the cause, he was finally a member of his favourite. Within bass, Fish proceeded with their preparations for the forthcoming term. Trey continued his experiments with the 4-track and produced another tape of the band's material entitled The Man Who Stepped Into Yesterday. Usually referred to as TMWSIY, it formed part of a cycle of thematic songs that Trey was writing. Named the gamehenghe, Trey and John were soon forced to make a decision about their own academic futures. Naturally high-spirited, they were fond of pulling various pranks on other students and occasionally university officials. These jokes were always good-hearted, but in light of their poor academic record, the faculty took a dim view of their behaviour. They were issued with a final warning: 1 more transgression and you're out. This worried the pair considerably. It meant that they would have to attend more regularly, meet deadlines, and generally clean up their act. Thankfully, they were soon presented with a solution to their problems. Goddard College, where Paige McConnell studied, was currently going through a recruitment crisis. Their comparatively small size and lack of publicity meant that many potential students were opting to go to bigger, more well-known institutions. In an effort to reverse the situation, the college began offering cash incentives to existing students. Proper album, and this time they wouldn't rely upon Trey's old 4-track. Instead, they would set to hire a student make an album of truly professional standard. Having looked widely for the right venue, the band eventually travelled to the Euphoric Sound Studios in Revere, Massachusetts. As with the early tapes, Trey would be the producer, but he would collaborate with Gordon Bookaloo, a professional recording engineer who also produced. The resulting album was Junta. 10,000 copies were released, most of them on tape, but a few rarities were pressed on vinyl and sent to family members. Like many bands' early recordings, it suffers from a lack of consistency. Trey demonstrated his impressive compositional skills, with 4 of the songs lasting for over 10 minutes. The arrangements were becoming increasingly intricate, as Trey chants. Absolute A Go-Go was a division of the respected indie label Rough Trade. Rough Trade themselves dealt with a wide variety of bands, from the Smashing Pumpkins to Britpop acts. and they had a reputation for being fair dealers and good businessmen. With the opportunity to release albums at a national level, the band felt it was wise to begin working on another full-length recording. This time, they returned to Vermont for the project and hired the Archer Studios in Winooski. These isolated studios were just the right setting for the band, as they preferred to work as far away from civilization as possible, thus reducing distractions. In these calm surroundings, they prepared their second album. Their new offering, Lawn Boy, showed a marked progression from Junta. Although there was still a heavy reliance on improvisation, the arrangements were tighter and less rambling. Trey's songwriting leaned more towards traditional structures, and he showed a flair for strong choruses. Lawn Boy also reflected the first signs of the genre blending that would become the band's stock in trade, ranging from Poor Heart, an authentic southern bluegrass number, to the title track with its laid-back, lounge tune quality. On the whole, Fish's
more than ever in the last year is, am I continuing what I set out to do in the beginning, breaking new ground musically, doing stuff that hasn't been done before, being on the cutting edge.
Despite the recent setback, the band refused to grow despondent and set out on the tour as planned. Due to last 3 months, the tour would circle the country before returning to Vermont. It had been a long time since Fish had played to audiences that were completely unfamiliar with them and their material. A handful of hardened fans accompanied the band on the entire tour, but the majority of those attending the concerts had no experience of the band. Even so, Fish delivered a series of impressive shows and won many new fans with their somewhat unorthodox performances. At one point, John Fishman had himself lowered naked from the rafters of the venue. When he reached the group, he proceeded to play a solo on a vacuum cleaner, which cut out it was so diverse, it became when they joined the summer caravan, they were given 1 5-minute slot, which they initially found very restricting. By the end of it, however, they'd become used to working within the time limits, cutting short any jams that threatened to extend that too far. The height of the band's 1992 tours was a series of dipping guitar levels Santana. They soon became friends with the Mexican star and the improvisation and the spiritual importance of music. By the end, Fish were exhausted but enthusiastic. At last, success seemed to be well and truly on its way.